After 15 hours of driving, I made it. Okay, so thank you guys so much for your well wishes while I was traveling. But we're here, and I'm still a little bit short on time, so we are going to just go over the hourly charts here. And we're going to give you that technical analysis on the hourly charts for the SPY, Qs, Apple, Tesla, Amazon, and NVIDIA. And as we're looking at the SPY right away, we just have to still point out, like we said in yesterday's video, we're outside that monthly, and it looks like we're actually heading towards the weekly, the top side of the weekly expected move. And what I just noticed here is we are in this wedging. And overall, what we just take from this is we're seeing price start to constrict again, right? We're getting really tight, and that means an explosive move is probably coming tomorrow, which makes total sense, right? Because we do have FOMC minutes, and then after the close, we will be getting NVIDIA earnings. So we have to look into NVIDIA, and that's coming very shortly. On this hourly SPY, yes, you have the divergences, and we were talking about how if we do curl up one more time, we're going to see that extend higher because we are in that positive territory down here on the MACD. We're setting up most likely another point of divergence so that if we do get some kind of bad news, we can see some kind of downfall. And right now, you just want to pay attention to that weekly range because you do have these divergences. You're at the top of that weekly range. It's just telling you for the week, hey, maybe pump the brakes a little bit. But overall, we want to pay attention to what actually happens, what data NVIDIA produces for us, and what the FOMC minutes has in store for us tomorrow. Now, the Qs here, you could make some kind of, wedge or something like that, but I just don't see it as productive for the Qs. It's very much more clear on the SPY. So we can pay attention to that on the SPY, but it's the same thing with the Qs here. We're approaching the top of that range, okay? We're starting to approach the top of that range, which just means we need to be a little more cautious throughout the week because we do land within these purple lines 68% of the time, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind. And the overall thing that I'm going to pay attention to, whether or not the data comes in bad or good, is this gap down here. So I really want to pay attention to this gap. And I think we actually have a good chance of filling that, most likely not this week because it is a shortened trading week unless we do see some crazy volatility. But I'm going to be looking at that early on into next week. The Qs here, you have that divergence. We were in positive territory, meaning that trend is going to continue upward as long as we're in that positive territory, but we could just get another point of reference for that triple divergence to set in. Point out on the Qs, just like the SPY, it's way outside of that monthly expected move. That's the top of the monthly expected move is actually this yellow line, and we're well outside of it at this point, which just means we do have that 68% chance for the SPY and the Qs to come back down within these yellow lines. This zone here that is priced in from the options data, 68% chance that we do land back within that zone by the end of the month. Apple's one that we were paying serious attention to just because, hey, we're outside and we're actually in this resistance zone. Okay, we're in this gap fill, gap resistance zone. And overall, what we were saying was, hey, this thing's in positive territory. So on the MACD here, so we could make another point of divergence here. Right now, you have like a 5 times divergence here. And we were just saying, hey, we left behind some unfinished business. The top of this gray zone is actually a gap fill. And so it's kind of interesting that we actually saw us pull back right before we filled that. And that's why I was just saying on Monday today, early on, we actually could go fill that gap. And that looks like what's happening at this point. So we did get out of this resistance zone, but it doesn't mean that there isn't more resistance because it is all the way up towards our previous high. So anything up here can act as resistance at this point, but it's going to be very dependent on that data. And FOMC minutes is going to be very important, but they are seeming to try to sound hawkish, but they are overall dovish. So what might be going on here is people are expecting some kind of pivot, and there's no pivot that comes this time around, but I do believe they will pivot either in December to give us that big boom, that big Christmas rally, or we're going to see them pivot early on into 2024. What you're looking for in Apple for a point to pay attention to, you have a lot of gaps, but you can see this high here lines up with this gap right here at 182.50. That's the first point I'm really going to pay attention to if we start to see some volatility in the market. And then the next point, if we do see a pretty sudden move down, right, is going to be that touch of this purple zone because we do like to bounce off this purple zone. Maybe if we're able to go down to this purple zone, get some kind of retest also of that wedge that we broke out of, that big daily wedge, then we can see this start to act like a trampoline and explode higher, especially if, sometime in December, we actually get some kind of pivot that is going forward and people will think, hey, this is the pivot, this is the soft landing, when really we actually have a high probability of crashing in 2024. Amazon here, we're really paying attention to this because you see how close it is to that center line. The important part of the center line is as long as we're above it, we're in positive territory. And what I was just stating from here, because we did get close to that center line, was we're most likely going to test this level here. And I was talking about some kind of double topping happening. Okay, now that doesn't mean we can't continue and break that high, right? We're still in that positive territory, but we do have that point of reference here. And if this is able to curl down on the MACD into that negative territory on Amazon, then we can see that negative trend begin. Where I'm paying attention to the price action on Amazon is actually this level of about pretty much this gap fill right here. You can see it lines up with this high, lines up with some support from way back. This is most likely where we're going to see some kind of bounce, but maybe that is just some kind of dead cat bounce to go to a little bit lower level. Now, I think it would be drastic to say, hey, we're going to go all the way down to this gap, but I think that if we do see a little bit deeper move, we could actually head to this level about 127. Okay, 127, 128 level right in here could be a good area for us to see that bounce. But right now, we just need to pay attention to the data tomorrow. We need to pay attention to the FOMC minutes and then the data that the NVIDIA earnings gives us tomorrow. Tesla, great structure for this trade. We talked about that for a long time and it looked really nice. And what we're just stating here is we're kind of in an area where we could see some kind of A, B, C pattern start to play out, right? This could just be some sort of flagging and then we head to lower levels. Or this actually is still in positive territory on the MACD. Okay, so you're still in positive territory on the MACD on Tesla. This hasn't gone negative at this point. So we do have a chance to come test this high or even get another retest of that big triangle that we've been talking about a lot this year. Okay, so this big triangle that we actually broke out of, you could get another test of that, right? But right now you really want to pay attention to this high, but the overall takeaway from this is, we are in positive territory on the MACD, so you do have a good probability to come test that high before breaking down to lower levels. And the only thing you're looking for here is for this trend to start to go negative. If we can see some kind of sudden drop to get us well within negative territory, we can start that negative trend. Okay, NVIDIA here, we were just talking about this hourly divergence, and last week we were talking about Wednesday, where we got this sudden dip, okay? When we get this little bit of a dip here, it actually gets that MACD very close to the center line, meaning we can start that negative trend to get some kind of pullback. Now, what will happen from here is, you notice that we crossed on the MACD and we're still in positive territory, so you're going to see that trend continue because we are in positive territory. But right now, it looks like we're setting up another point of divergence. The technicals are kind of signaling to you there's weakness in this move, so if the NVIDIA earnings actually comes out poor, we can see a sudden drop in the expected move for this stock is like 10% up or 10% down this week. It has the biggest range for this week. I give those ranges, on my Patreon down in the description. You can click that link down there. But overall, what you want to pay attention to here is, with earnings, technicals can sometimes go out the window. So if they do produce good numbers, you will most likely see this go hit its expected move, which is about 9% up. And then if it does give poor earnings, we could probably see a touch of the bottom side of that expected move, which would be about 9% down. Okay, so that's just something to pay attention to with NVIDIA. But overall, we are looking for some kind of higher low setup. Okay, so I'm looking for that higher low setup, and the overall points that I'm paying attention to are I'm going to first look at this point right here of about 465. I think 465 is a good little area in here to pay attention to. But if we do go to lower levels, I would pay attention to this gap fill down here at 423, which lines up with some buying in that area, right? There's some big buying in that area, and it would get us closer to that neckline where we actually saw this big run begin. So that's what I'm going to pay attention to on NVIDIA. Yields here, we'll go over this real quick on a daily actually. So the yields here, you notice they are in negative territory. And I think if we do get some kind of curl up and we get back down, we're going to really go down in these yields. And that's why I think a pivot is on the horizon, but I just think that they're not going to do it just yet. And I think that if they are going to, people are starting to talk about a pivot and talk about a soft landing. If they start to act a little bit hawkish with tomorrow's statement and actually mention no kind of pivot, this actually can make these rates start to bounce higher. And I'm overall paying attention to this level of about 4.8%. Okay, that's what I'm paying attention to on the yields. And then after that, I believe that a pivot is on the horizon, and then we can see some kind of, lower high setup in the near future for these yields. Now on TLT, I actually readjusted this line here, and you can see how we can get kind of a lopsided head and shoulders here, which is the TLT is the opposite side of that 10-year yield, okay? Now, what this would say is this isn't necessarily our right shoulder. And what that would mean is we're going to see some kind of move lower, right? If there's no kind of pivot anything like that in this statement, then we can see that start to head to lower levels on TLT and start to see the 10-year yield rise, right? But I'm paying attention to this level. It's in confluence with a lot of liquidity in here. I believe it's a good zone, and this would just mean that this right here is not our right shoulder at this point, right? This isn't our right shoulder, but we need to go make a little bit deeper one. And then maybe we see this head and shoulder start to play out with some kind of pivot in the future. Okay, that's what I'm paying attention to with TLT. Now, I'm just going to mention one thing with the VIX here, okay? The VIX here, what we were paying attention to in yesterday's video, and what I mentioned was I'm going to pay attention if the VIX actually heads to lower levels again, but I see the VVIX hold up. So let's just notice right here that we are heading to lower levels, and what's happening with the VVIX, which is the volatility of the volatility. It's still remaining flat. We actually, ended up, it's got a minute here to close or something like that. So we're actually up by 0.02, while the VIX itself is down by 2.82%. So we're actually seeing that flatness, which is something that I mentioned I would give you guys in my video if that started to happen. Looks like that's happening. The VIX is remaining flat, the VIX is actually heading to lower levels while the VVIX is flat, which is very important to pay attention to. And we could start to see, these Bollinger Bands are starting to contract at this point. And we could see an explosive move as of tomorrow with the VVIX and the VIX, because the SPY is in such a tight move with the price action that we will move to some kind of expansion in the very near future, meaning most likely tomorrow. So the overall takeaway from this video is things are getting very, very close together, which means that we are looking for some kind of explosive move, probably as of tomorrow. Okay, I believe that after tomorrow, maybe going on into a little bit into Wednesday, that we are going to see an explosive move. And one of the most explosive stocks that's going to, be affected by this is going to be NVIDIA because of the earnings. So we want to pay attention to NVIDIA earnings, and we want to pay attention to the FOMC minutes and see if we are able to start a negative trend with this information. Okay, so let's pay attention to that this week. But overall, just thank you guys so much for watching, especially when these videos are a little shorter with my move. I appreciate all the goodwill while we are, driving 16 hours or something like that. So I really, really appreciate it. I wish you guys all the luck in the world trading tomorrow, and I hope you guys have a great night. All right, peace.